Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on managing the people side of risk. My name is Helena Zikova. I'm Growth Enablement Leader for Mercer Marsh Benefits in Continental Europe, and I will be your host for today's webinar. The key asset of organizations is people, and at Mercer Marsh Benefits, people risk is our business. So that's why we're pleased to present to you today the insights of our People Risks Survey and to start a conversation with you and our audience today on people risk as one of the key challenges of today. In addition to that, today we will facilitate a panel discussion with experts with a very, very wide range of experiences from HR to risk to legal and finance. During the whole length of the webinar, we'll also like to engage you as our audience in the discussion. So please feel free to reach out to us via chat and ask any questions or give us any comments. You can also feel free to challenge our ideas and our thoughts during the webinar. When we're done with the official part of the webinar, we will take time to address your questions live. So, having said that, I will now hand over to my colleague, Kevin Kinsella, the sales leader for Mercer Marsh Benefits in Continental Europe, that will give us some insights on people risk. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Helena, and thank you all for joining the session this morning. I wanted to share with you some of the insights from the recent People Risk Survey and also highlight what the implications are for business. People Risk 2020 proved to be the emotional equivalent of a marathon, and the report picks up on a range of COVID-19 health consequences through the report. Companies need to pay attention to the mental health risks from ongoing pandemic stresses. We see companies transforming their organization and work design, aligning new technology and skills, focus on cultivating health and well-being, and building a more human-centric leadership culture. The pandemic has shifted the priorities for young talents making job choices. In terms of digital risk, the rapid switch to remote working has resulted in increased cyber exposure and more complex and potentially less secure networks. It has really highlighted the importance of upskilling and training employees. From a political and societal perspective, we're seeing an increased emphasis on stakeholder capitalism, which in turn drives companies to focus on sustainability and the ESG that come from all angles. And the correlation between good ESG companies and their performance is becoming more tangible. On the political side, border closures, lockdowns, and export restrictions, along with domestic policies that focus on national security and self-sufficiency, all hamper access to foreign talent and investment and result in severe disruptions in international supply chains. Next slide, please, Kate. However, people are an organization's most important strength and can bring significant risk to a business if not properly managed. Never before has it been so important that HR and risk management break down silos and work together to protect, equip, and motivate this critical asset. The pandemic has really highlighted more than ever the health and resilience of your people is firmly linked to the health and resilience of your business. Ultimately, people risks are impacting business continuity, reputation, and indeed safety. At Mercer Marsh Benefits, or MMB, people risk is our business. We've categorized 25 people risks into 5 main areas so that organizations are able to identify, prioritize, and manage the threats that are most pertinent to them. The 5 areas we've focused on are health and safety, talent practices, accelerated digitalization, environment and social, governance, and financial. We will be sharing these slides, so I'm not going to delve in any great detail to the 5 core components, but next slide, please, Kate. As you can see, they're all indeed important. Mercer Marsh Benefits conducted a pulse survey to get risk manager and HR views on which people risks have the greatest likelihood and impact, along with an understanding of how organizations are managing these risks. The people risks were broadly categorized into the 5 areas I shared on the previous slide. Comprehensive in its geographic reach, with almost 1,400 participants in the survey globally, across North America, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean and Asia. The survey respondents were broadly split into 45% human resources professionals and 54% risk managers. While businesses need to consider all these 25 risks, each firm will have different priorities. For example, environment and social is very important right now in consumer goods, while accelerating digitization is really critical in the financial services sector. We're seeing manufacturing and automotive focused on governance and financial, while talent practices are really hot in technology, life sciences, and the retail wholesale sectors. In the pandemic, health and safety is top of mind for everyone. In general, the survey respondents indicated all of the risks were fairly likely and severe. We were somewhat surprised by the degree of concentration. However, when you drill in closer, you get a better lens on the variation. So next slide, please, Kate. So the risk impact score, or RIS, is the product of the likelihood and severity ratings. An RIS of 1 is the least likely, least severe risk. An RIS of 25 is the most likely and most severe risk. If we look at the top 2 risks, potential questions that an organization should be asking might be as follows. Are we confident that the risk of a data breach associated with HR data is sufficiently mitigated? In the suite of surveys that MMB conducts over the year, 53% of employers believe their current HR technology processes and procedures expose them to undue risk. Second question, are our HR processes aligned to the employee experience you are trying to create? In 2020, 81% of employers said that achieving a globally consistent employee experience is a really high priority, and its importance has increased year on year since 2018. We focus then on in respect of workforce exhaustion. Has your C-suite's interest in employee well-being risen during the pandemic? An incredible 95% of employers believe investment in health and well-being will be the same or a greater priority in the future. How are you equipping your managers and HR professionals to handle employee health and well-being issues? Workers report that more varied health and well-being resources an employer offers, the more energized and supported they feel, and the less likely they are to actually leave their employer. So really important. So the final slide for me, there are a number of geographic differences as well. We've isolated the results from global and from Europe. Interestingly, there's a lot of correlation around the top 5 risks. I do have to admit personally that I was a little surprised to see cybersecurity at the top of both. That was, of course, until the events in Ireland, where I live, emerged over the past 10 days. The Irish government and its health system suffered a cyber attack, which has paralyzed the health service, with the hijackers, or the hackers, I should say, demanding 20 million in ransom to prevent the release of personal data. This is yet to be resolved, and there'll be weeks, if not months, until systems are restored. So from a HR perspective, we see talent attraction, retention, and engagement in second place in Europe and globally. So I think this really does confirm that the top 2 risks do indeed straddle the areas of risk and HR, and we really see this alignment growing as a trend into the future. So that's it for me for now. I'll hand back across to you, Helena.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for sharing these insights on people risks. And we will continue talking about people risks during the webinar. I would just like to point out to our audience that we'll be summarizing the results from this people risk survey in a report that will come out in the next few weeks. And everybody that is in the audience and registered for this event will get exclusive access to that report as soon as it is out. And before we move on, I would just like to remind everyone in the audience, once again, please feel free to write your questions and your comments on chat, and we'll take the time to address them at the end of our webinar. And having said that, without any further ado, I would like to open up the panel discussion in this webinar and introduce our panelists for today. So on the panel, we'll have Frank Van der Waal, Director, Reward and International Mobility from GSK Belgium, Gabor Farkas, Group Insurance Manager at MOL Group, Kiki Tsuru, Data Protection Officer and Legal Advisor at Teresias SA, and Miguel Blanca, VP Finance and HR at T Systems International, Iberia. So welcome to our panelists, and we're very glad to have you here. We're very glad to take a deep dive into your organizations and your roles from your experience to address the key people risks that Kevin has just presented to us. So having said that, let's start diving into the content with the first question, which I think is quite interesting and a little bit provocative. So when we looked at the top 10 risks on a global level and on a European level, I found it particularly interesting that the environmental risks made it into the top 10. They barely did. They were on the 10th place, but they are still there. However, what I saw now that was clearly missing in the European top 10 ranking was the risk around diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is quite interesting because when we brought it into comparison to the UK risks and the UK top 10 in the survey, that type of risks clearly made it there. So I would actually be very keen to hear from you in your roles and from your perspective. How do you interpret this? So we can have perhaps Miguel from your perspective. If you could unmute yourself, please. Great.
Yes, sorry.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. Well, from my side, I think it's obviously a risk. I mean, there's a reason why it's showing up there, but I really, from a company perspective, from a people perspective, I don't see it as much as a risk, more as a moral obligation as well now for companies, right? And this might be very different depending on the geography you live in. But I think at least here for us at T-Systems and the Deutsche Telekom Group being a European-based country, for this is now part of our DNA, right? This is a moral obligation from the company. We don't do it, or we don't push for diversity measures across the company because it's a risk, but because it's a moral obligation to do it, right? It's a world we all want to live in, and that's the reason why we do it.
Great. I think that's also an interesting perspective because you say you don't look at it as a risk, but how does that translate into other industries? How does that look like from your perspective, Frank?
Yeah, so at GlaxoSmithKline, I mean, obviously being a UK-based company with a large presence in the US, I mean, yes, it's very important that diversity and inclusion is part of your daily business. But also, I mean, we clearly made a number of internal targets around diverse talent within the organization. But also in the UK and the US, there are some legal obligations that need to be fulfilled. So you need to report on gender equal pay kind of statistics. But also, as an example, in the UK, there is an obligation to report on the pay gap between the CEO and the average of the population. So it is slightly different in the Anglo-Saxon world than maybe in Western Europe, indeed.
Great. So maybe it would also be interesting to hear a perspective on diversity, equity, and inclusion risk from a legal point of view. And Kiki, that has a lot to do with your role. So we'll also be happy to hear, how do you look at this?
That's true, Elena. Thank you. Just to give the whole picture, Tiresias is a credit bureau, it's the Greek credit bureau, and it's in the banking sector. So being in the banking sector entails some strict guidelines and policies imposed by the regulator. Environmental risks are also at the top of the agenda of all sectors, business sectors in Greece. But as far as diversity, inclusion, and equity is concerned, I think that most businesses, banks included, have introduced really strict internal guidelines in order to address these risks. As far as the banking sector in particular is concerned, and although banks do not have a lower direct social and environmental impact, they do share responsibility because they lend to other firms that indeed either produce unsafe products or pollute the environment or even violate human rights. So banks are obliged in Greece to introduce and implement specific policies and internal guidelines or questionnaires that play a vital role on not only on whether they're going to proceed with the loan, but also to the pricing of the product itself. So that's the picture in Greece.
Great. I think it's also interesting to see that these, let's say, topics are turning from topics or issues that we're discussing about into real legislation. So it means that the importance is going to raise, and hopefully will then also have a changed risk landscape in the next years. But let's move on to a different topic. And I think it was quite clear from us, from the picture that Kevin presented, that cybersecurity is top of mind. And that's also something that the HR and the risk community that participated in the survey were very much aligned on. So I think talking about cybersecurity as a people risk, I would be quite keen to hear from Gabor in his, let's say, risk management role on how he looks at that. And I'll be also very happy if Miguel or Frank could also chip in a more HR related role to hear about how does that translate into the HR community. So over to you, Gabor.
Thanks, Lana. So cyber security and cyber risk is definitely a hot topic in these days. I mean, you can hear more and more news all around the world about certain cyber attacks attacking different industries and services. And unfortunately, MOL is not an exception in this situation as well. We also experienced cyber attacks in the past, attacking certain companies within MOL Group, which resulted certain service interruptions, smaller interruptions as well. So we really feel that this is happening. So this is not just some internet news. It is around us all the time. Therefore, we have to really, educate our people, make people aware that these things are an imminent risk for our operation. And there's basically two things to mention here. Is obviously the prevention, how you can actually prevent the whole things to happen, and then what are the tools to mitigate the potential impact of the incident. I mean, needless to say that a robust and complex IT security system like the hardware and software side should be in place. That's no question about that. But also it's very important that there are global statistics and surveys showing that roughly 95% of the cyber incidents and attacks are due to human errors. So it's very, very important that we educate people, our colleagues in the organization, teach them how to detect phishing and spear phishing and all type of hacker attacks. And for that, obviously, MOL IT security is very much prepared for it. There are annual trainings for that. There are compulsory tests every year for every employee, no matter how long you are with the company. There are cyber awareness weeks organized by the cybersecurity teams as well. And then when there's a new joiner to the company, the initial let's say training is including already the cybersecurity element as well. So that is part of the starter package practically, and this is what we are trying to do. And then on the other side, on the mitigation side, obviously cyber insurance is an important element here. We saw in the past that so-called silent cyber coverages are no longer available. So like from a property insurance perspective, these are more and more excluded, which force us and similar companies to think about a separate standalone cyber insurance policies as well. This is what we are currently doing as well, trying to understand what is available, how that helps in particular situation.
Great, Gabor. I think that offers very interesting insights from a risk management perspective. But I guess, Miguel, in your company, you rely solely on IT systems, right? That's what you are doing.
Right.
And how
Yes.
does that translate in your industry? I guess cybersecurity risks is on everybody's minds, but you have the highest exposure from all industries.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is what we do for a living, so it's part of our bread and butter. I have to say we are obsessed with this topic, right? And there's a lot of communication to employees going on all the time, because at the end of the day, a lot of these risks really come through users themselves, right? Through clicking on the wrong link, being curious about an email you received, all this stuff. And so we make a lot of effort there from an HR perspective on creating conscience on employees, right? Making sure they go through the trainings, and also making apparent and tangible for them the benefits of being conscious of cybersecurity on a personal level as well, right? Because we are all exposed also to being cyber attacked on a personal level, not just as a company. And I think that is a very, very important perspective from when you're thinking about the people side of cybersecurity risk, right? That everybody has some personal stake as well on this, right? On being careful at a personal level, and of course, as a consequence as well for protecting the company and our customers.
Excellent. And I think what might be an interesting perspective to hear is from you, Kiki, because you are the data protection officer in your organization. And what we touched upon, cybersecurity also leaves a lot of room for data breaches. So how do you interpret that?
Fortunately, that is a nightmare for me because, as you all know, GDPR provides for a strict deadline of reporting such breaches. So it's really a nightmare. But what we haven't mentioned till now, and I think that it's really important to say, is how COVID-19 has also affected the said risk. In the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, the workforce had to shift from its traditional working at the office to work remotely, to work at home or work anywhere. Many businesses had to struggle whether to see if working remotely was secure or even possible for the whole organization. So this raised a lot of security and cybersecurity problems for the organizations, taking into account that all attackers are just out of the blue taking advantage of remote working, are taking advantage of the pandemic and also taking advantage of the surge of these crypto coins. So, in my perspective, facing the new normality following the pandemic, and also building up a strong incident report plan is what companies should do in order to mitigate cybersecurity risk. Being a credit bureau and processing personal data as a business makes cybersecurity our core activity. And large organizations, much larger than ourselves, that were proven to be safe in the past, have suffered huge data breaches, and that makes us all being afraid of the next day. I can name numerous cases where hacks and data thefts were enabled by weak security or avoidable mistakes or cover-ups. I have a short list. In 2017, Equifax lost personal and financial information of nearly 150 million individuals due to a system vulnerability that failed to fix. In 2016, Uber had over 600,000 driver and 17 million user accounts breached. In 2013, Yahoo suffered a massive security breach that affected its entire database. whereas British Airways was fined with £26 million due to poor security arrangement. Marriott International was also fined after payment information, names, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, and passport numbers of up to 500 million customers were also compromised. And the list goes on and on with Google, with Facebook. So I think that taking all this into account, cybersecurity has rightfully climbed up to the top of this 10 top list of risks to be addressed by organizations nowadays.
Wow, I think that was very powerful, especially the statistics, because I think when we start looking at the statistics, we start realizing how many large companies are affected by that. And as you mentioned, that this whole situation has been exacerbated through the pandemic that just moved us into that digital environment and made us exposed and very vulnerable towards these kind of risks. But also mentioning the pandemic, of course, last year was all about the pandemic, and the pandemic changed the way that we worked and we functioned. And of course, that accordingly changed the risk landscape. But looking at the risk landscape in general, the one that Kevin shared, the global and the European one, I would be actually quite keen to hear from you. Which one of them do you think were particularly important for your organization and for your role in the past months and also in the next months that are to come? So I don't know, maybe Gabor can give us his insights.
Yes, thanks, Helena. So basically, at MOL, I mean, we are obviously in the oil and gas business, and it's an industry experience that the workforce is very much aging. Unfortunately, this is true for us as well, but also for our competitors as well. That means that the average age in our company is something like 43, 44 years. At certain technological size, this could be even 50 years old, 50 years. So these are relatively large numbers, and clearly for us, this is probably one of the biggest challenge: how to make younger the workforce, to make us, to enable us actually to maintain a safe and long-term operation at sites as well. So this is probably one thing. We have, of course, programs how to do it, and incentives and programs with universities and high schools to attract younger workforces. We have scholarship programs as well. Again, so it's a big challenge for us. The other thing is, which is very much connected to this, is the workforce health. I mean, obviously, as you get older, you have more and more health issues. And living in the CE region, where the health system is maybe not the best in the EU, people are just simply going to the doctors when they have big issues, when maybe it is already too late. So practically, let's say about 4 years ago, when MOL introduced a health insurance program to the employees, the main goal was there to educate and to a little bit to give the opportunity to the employees to go to the doctor for pre-screenings on a regular basis, so that they can discover health issues early in advance, when it can be cured and when it can be managed in a proper way. And of course, this is happening now. This is an educational phase program. Opportunities there. People can use those private medical services as they wish, and hopefully this is contributing to their happiness and safety as well.
Very interesting, Gabor. I think especially because there's the link between the, let's say, typical talent issues that you mentioned at the beginning to workforce health. But I'll also be quite keen to hear how is the situation in your organization, Frank. Are you affected by the same issues, by the aging workforce, or are there completely different risks that you're mostly affected by?
Well, obviously, I mean, aging workforce, yes, is something that is also in the top of our minds. But I would like to focus a little bit more on the mental health piece, because clearly it's something that we have seen in Western Europe coming up during the last couple of years. I mean, the number of burnouts and psychological related conditions that often employees suffer have definitely increased. And COVID hasn't helped. I think people that often were in a very difficult work-life balance, working practically in your home, small children. So uncertainty about the future. I mean, it has impacted obviously also companies from a financial point of view. So mental health is something that is absolutely be there. And I think on top of making sure that people unfortunately were absent because of a mental health condition, a program how to get them back to work. I mean, with applying and with help of external partners, where you are definitely intention to help these people coming back to work and to help them solve their issues. We also focused more and more on the preventive side. So it's possible at JSK to follow a number of programs around mental health resilience, and that definitely has an impact. But the line managers have a key role to play in this, because often the first contact between a line manager and an employee can give a number of indications that yes, there is an issue. There might be something that is not working well on the well-being piece. So also we are launching programs towards line managers, how to detect in your different teams when something is not going appropriately, when it's around medical or mental health conditions. In general, I think on the medical piece, we have launched in a couple of ways a program called Partnership for Prevention, which basically means that for JSK employees and their family members, anywhere in the world, they have right, or they have access to roughly 20 medical checks conditions that they can use. And that's, I mean, in certain areas like Africa, that's obviously really significant added value. And as an example, I mean, providing free vaccinations, because we produce and we distribute obviously vaccines as the largest vaccines company in the world. Free vaccination is part of that, and that's obviously the type of programs that can make a difference towards our employees as well.
Great. I think that you also provided a very interesting link towards the mental and the physical health, which is of course something that cannot be working independently. It's part of let's say the general health. So how does that translate into what you're doing at T Systems, Miguel? How do you look at those trends around physical and mental health?
Well, I guess they're very, very interconnected, right? I think obviously being physically okay can also help to be mentally okay, but it's not necessarily means it's going to happen, right? At the beginning of the pandemic, we were very, very focused on the physical side of it, right? Because everybody was concerned with people being locked down, that they were not doing or exercising or eating well or all this stuff. So there was a lot of focus on the physical side of it, and then as both Gabor and Frank were saying, it started evolving into the mental side of it as well, right? As the pandemic continued to extend, and we have engaged now into doing a Zoom or deep diving into these topics, right? Specifically, a lot of our questions in poll surveys that we do in the employee surveys are geared towards this, to understand where there might be red flags, right, and try to take action on it. So we have started really a company-wide program to detect psychosocial risks, right, within teams, and then take actions on it. We're using third parties to help us do this, because we're not the experts on it. And we continue, of course, to develop and implement and change and reinvent programs also for the physical side of it, right? We haven't forgotten about that. But definitely the health side has taken the mental health, has taken a big importance lately, and we are putting it at the very top of the agenda. And I think one topic that I want to mention is, of course, and I heard we were talking about managers having a big responsibility on this side, right, on the mental health side. But we shouldn't forget as well that managers themselves are exposed to these mental health issues as well, right? And managers, middle management, or even top management, right? And we always like to talk about this as well within the board at this system, saying, hey guys, we need to make sure we have our backs as well, right? And we feel comfortable, and there's well-being in this group as well, right? And if we're not supposed to be invincible. And we are exposed to these issues as well, right? And we should be able to talk about it and to address them as well at any level. So yeah, big topic in the agenda, the very top.
Exactly, and I think it's quite interesting because from what I heard from all of you here is that mental health is definitely climbing the top of the risk landscape in organizations, especially because now we acknowledge that it is part of the health of a person, and that mental and physical health coexist, and every single condition has physical and mental implications for people, and we should not forget that. And that I just want to use one sentence that a colleague of mine really likes saying, and he says, health plus engagement equals productivity. And I think that that's what organizations are realizing right now, and hence that they're taking that active role into helping the health management of their own employees. And for sure, I mean, COVID had implications on mental health in the workplace. But we also have some old challenges that were there even before COVID. And COVID just, I guess, exacerbated them additionally. And those are the talent challenges. And as we could see on the top 10, the talent retention and engagement was the number 2 risk in Europe and also globally. So what is your experience in this respect? Frank?
Yeah, so talent agenda extremely important. I mean, in the pharmaceutical industry, you compete with a lot of companies. We see that there are some new types of talent, like people that are very strong in data analytics, digital. I mean, because we do a lot of statistics around clinical trials. People that have experience in oncology. So that's really key, and obviously, I mean, you need to stand out. We try to be a modern employer. We try to have a branding to do a lot about. I mean, where can we be different to offer flexibility to employees? Because obviously there's an expectation also post-COVID that will continue to be. We want to be a very family-friendly employer, providing additional care leaves, paternity leaves. And so within the talent agenda, I mean, it's very important that process is part of your daily business. So we do on a regular basis with HR, typically coordinating that with the business talent reviews. We apply a methodology which is called 9-box. So on one hand, you're going to judge the potential, but also the performance over time of an individual. And leading to, I mean, to the 9-box talent situation of an individual, a development plan on individual basis is going to be drafted. At the same time, the company invests heavily in programs like Future Leaders, where you tend to hire graduates and give them the opportunity to work in different types of departments before they actually do a landing and they go for a long-term job. So that's quite important. And that development, obviously, I mean, we always call it the 70-20-10% rule. So 70% of the development you do on the job, 20% it's through like typical assignments or networking within the company. And only 10% of the development is around formal trainings. And obviously, I mean, if you then link the talent agenda to the succession plan, we tend to have a succession plan for all the critical roles within the company. And obviously, I mean, if you are on a succession plan and you need to be at a certain moment ready, because there's a possibility that you will step into a new role. Development, making sure that somebody is ready for the next step is obviously very, very critical. And maybe the last piece, since a number of years, we believe heavily in mentoring and coaching. So there are possibilities for individuals to follow both programs. with recognized coach. We have some people internally that do that, but also mentoring. I mean, making sure that you have these connections internally that can help you in your career, but also on a daily basis.
Great, great. I think that offers a very good overview over the talent agenda. And maybe because Gabor already touched upon part of that with the aging workforce, maybe we could get your view also from a risk management perspective on how does the talent challenge translate into your role and your organization.
I think there's two, let's say, different aspects of the story. Obviously, MOL is engaging blue-collar workers as well as white-collar workers as well. So there are different, let's say, probably approach to the different group of people. So in case of blue collars, for us, probably the talent acquisition is maybe the biggest challenge. How to attract younger generation to join to the oil and gas business, and because once they are kind of joined to the company, the whole benefit program what MOL is offering is quite competitive. It is motivating the employees to develop themselves, to learn more skills, because the whole remuneration program is built on this type of self-development. So practically, once we manage to attract a talent, then it is relatively easy to retain it. So this is for the blue collars. Obviously, the white collars, so like finance role or legal or HR roles, these are, let's say, a bit more competitive in a way, and retention is maybe a bigger issue. But yes, and of course, as Frank mentioned, flexibility is also an issue, because I think in this COVID time, people are, especially younger generation, they just realize that there are different ways of working as well. Flexi work, home office type of things are all appealing more for the younger generation rather than to the old one. So I think MOL is obviously trying to respond to these type of demands on a most flexible way, just to keep ahead our position in front of the competition as well. So yeah.
Excellent. And I think when we're talking about industries that are very flexible and relatively younger, I think that's mostly the IT industry. So how does that translate into what you are doing at T-Systems, Miguel?
So what we're seeing that's happening actually, well, obviously the ability to work remotely in a digital company, right, in an IT company has actually exploded totally, right? There's a lot of adherence to remote working now, and this has really changed. I can even say it has changed the labor market itself, because now, so for example, business models in which you were relying on low-cost cities and you were building maybe a point of production in a low-cost city, in a smaller city, as opposed to, for example, Barcelona or Madrid, is now changing, right? Because now you have people living in the smaller cities, out cities, I don't know, like Granada or Tenerife, or in the islands or something like that, being hired by companies in Madrid and Barcelona and paying salaries from Madrid and Barcelona, right? So they are getting the best of both worlds, and it's disrupting the full business model of having a low-cost location, right? Because now everybody can work from anywhere, right? So this is being a big challenge for us, and you need to find a way to address it. What we have found out as well is that more than ever, the purpose of the company has a lot of meaning for people, especially the younger generations, right? Everything related to social responsibility, how the company is addressing topics like, for example, diversity, environment, all this stuff is very, very important. Also, what the company does for a living itself, right? What kind of customers do you have? So, for example, in our case, we have a big public customers here in Barcelona, in Catalonia especially, and there's a lot of public services where the IT is provided by us, right? And this, in some sense, for example, when we had the emergency on COVID, everything that we do for the health system was very appreciated by all the employees, right? And they found a lot of purpose of saying, hey, my company is doing this, right? They are in charge of the site where you registered for the vaccination, or for example, this kind of stuff. It's super appealing, and it's actually a very important part of talent retention now, right? Of course, everything else continues to be there, right? Salary, compensation, cool offices, good policies, flexibility, and all this stuff is there. But what we see is more and more purpose becomes a very important ingredient in talent retention as well. So this is very, very important. And then I think in terms of culture, I do have some concerns in terms of this craziness for working remotely. Everybody, right? Teleworking. I have worked in 3 different countries. So I work in Mexico, in the US, and here in Spain. And in the US, I was mostly in a company that was very dispersed across the US with everybody working remotely. And you do see a very different engagement in employees when they're able to see their faces and go for a coffee and grab a beer and stuff like that, compared to offices where you never see your colleagues and you are always on telephone conferences. Right? Have to say, back in the time when I was working in the US, we were not using video calls; we're just using conference calls, and that has made a difference. But I am concerned about the risk of losing engagement in employees as everybody just decides to work 100% from home, right? So we're trying to find a balance there. We're trying to keep the balance of being flexible, because this flexibility is very important for employees, but at the same time, make sure it's attractive for them to still come to the office 2-3 times a day, 2-3 times a week, and stay connected and socially active also with their colleagues. And I think those are the big challenges that we're facing here.
Great. I think it's very interesting to hear from all your different perspectives, right? Because we have the HR, we have the risk perspective, and how do they interfere? And I think particularly, Miguel, what you mentioned now around the purpose is something that companies and organizations are reevaluating a lot now, because the new generation has, let's say, different criteria on why they work for a certain company and why they engage for a certain company. But it's not also, it's not turning to be just a choice, because I think now, as we already touched upon at the beginning, the regulation is also starting to deal with those topics. And now we have that kind of, let's say, stakeholder capitalism that's being developed. And I think that for that reason might be that the legal and compliance risks also made it in the top 10 in Europe, which is quite particular, because that was not the case with many other risks in other regions. So we'll also be very keen to get that kind of legal perspective, Kiki, from you. I know that we touched upon some of the issues around the regulation, but maybe we can expand on how do you look at that in your role?
Thank you, Helena. You say since the credit crunch, I think that risk and compliance, legal and compliance risks, are now at the top of the agenda of business involved in the banking sector. However, how its institution defines the legal and compliance and how business and credit risk are interplaying with each other depends on the risk appetite of the organization, and also falls under the discussions and the decisions of their board. So even in the same country, not only across Europe, legal and compliance may not have the same definition from one firm and from one organization to the other. Tiresias, in order to address said risks, has developed, I think, really strict internal guidelines. And I may say that these guidelines are even stricter than the ones imposed by the regulator. Except for the guidelines, we believe that constant training and awareness, internal audits, close follow-up of the legal and the market developments are ways to mitigate legal and compliance risks. But what I really find comforting is that our organization has recently managed to get PI and director and officers policies, which is something we're really proud of. And following that, accidental errors, acts, omissions now are covered by the policies. And that makes our board members, gives our board members sounder sleep at night. So this is really, really important for us. Mars has significantly helped us with that. And in the respect of by deploying all solutions available, taking into account our corporation's strategy and needs, as well as the market trends. So that make us, that facilitated us to make the most suitable choice for it. And we thank Mars for that. So,
thank you, Kiki. That's also very, very good to hear. And as you mentioned, we do have risks everywhere, and risks are there. We can also implement different kinds of solutions to mitigate them, and also transferring those
transfer
risks.
With the policies. Yes, we managed to transfer the risks by signing these policies, and this is the reason this is so comforting for us.
Exactly. And because legal and compliance risks will be raising for sure. And I think the increased regulation then also gives space for that type of solutions. And another industry, which is also very regulated, is the pharma industry, in which you are in, Frank. So how do you look at that? What is your interpretation on the importance of legal and compliance where you work?
Legal and compliance is very important within the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, and obviously there are a couple of things in order to reduce or mitigate these risks, and something that we apply on top of internal, external auditors is a principle called management monitoring, where people within the business will have to do some checks themselves, often within another department. But it's an additional layer into the mitigation of a risk. And obviously, I mean, if you all translate that to HR, and I think we talked already a little bit about data privacy, but that's obviously key. And I mean, people are being trained. Employees need to be very, very cautious with sharing personal data. But obviously also, I mean, the tax, the social security, the governmental landscapes are changing almost on a daily basis, and companies need to comply with that within the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, if your main customers that buy your vaccines are countries, I mean, obviously you cannot be seen in a specific country as being non-compliant, because then none of these governments will continue to buy your product. So it's there's a lot of energy. There are a lot of people working on this. There are very strict rules with respect to compliance and GDPR, and we do have this culture of making sure that legal has a check and signs off on a lot of stuff.
Great, excellent. So I think that now, because we covered the topics that we were planning on covering, we would like to address some of the questions that we have received from our audience. So there were pre-submitted questions, and one of the things in which we're talking about, and this maybe something of a turning point, and between the risk and the HR agenda, is now the fact that we have an increased, let's say, polarized society. So that polarizing moment that we have right now is also affecting organizations. So I think it would be interesting. I don't know, maybe Miguel could expand on that. How do you look at that?
Well, I guess from a company perspective, I think the healthiest thing is not to take sides in polarized discussions, right? Of course, if there's a right side to it, you have to take it, right? If it's from a moral perspective correct to take it. But I think in general, when we're talking politics, for example, right, and we've lived it very strongly here in Barcelona. You've all heard about the political crisis in Barcelona with the central government in Spain. As a company, you have to stay very neutral on these discussions, right? And you have to show also from a management perspective that you show empathy for both sides, that you promote tolerance, that you promote respect, that you try to make sure everybody is doing the same from a personal perspective, right? And leave those political discussions outside of the work environment, right? And it's okay to have them, but always with certain respect and with caution in that regards, right? And tolerance. And also, I think for us, it also spiked the need to revisit as well how we deal with interpersonal conflicts, right? So every company has policies for this kind of stuff and processes as well when there's conflict between employees. And also taking a second look at those, maybe in some companies it's getting outdated, right? How we deal with interpersonal problems. But this is something that might be happening more and more, right? That these discussions arise in the workplace and that it leads to people fighting over issues and creating
Great.
a bad work environment. So also having good processes in that regard is very important.
Exactly. And I think what you said already is that now we're putting people in the center, right? And we're making decisions, putting people in the center, and sometimes just remaining people oriented and neutral, and maintaining that balance is key in leadership, but also in employee engagement. We also received another question, which was around risks and workplace safety. So I think, Gabor, maybe you could be able to take that, because in your organization you have a lot of high risks when it comes to workforce safety. So what are the main challenges around that, and how do you go about that, considering the fact that we only have a few minutes of time left? So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. There's again a couple of things here probably which were to mention is obviously we are operating technological sites like refineries and petrochemical units as well, which is typically a high risk area. So there, I think we already kind of covered a little bit this mental health kind of things as well. Mental health in these places are absolutely important. So people need to be focused all the time. We are implementing some life-saving rules as well. So people have to really follow these rules and focus all the time to avoid any fatal incidents or serious injuries as well. The other thing is that we are operating in countries where, like remote places, like in Pakistan, for instance, or Kurdistan, in some relatively wild places, where there are some additional risk for our people as well, meaning, for example, terrorism, which is, let's say, part of the everyday life, and kidnap, for instance. So these things are, again, in certain group of people, this is important, and they are kind of threatened by these type of things. And I think as a company, it is our obligation to keep our people in safe places, give them everything to make their life better, that they are kind of happy and willing to work for us. Because if they see that MOL is not taking care of them, then they just simply don't want to be relocated to Pakistan or to Kurdistan, for instance, because they just don't feel safe there. And that is obviously a business issue for us if we don't have people to send to Pakistan, for instance. So these are very important things. We are, spending a lot of time and energy on this kind of stuff.
Excellent. And I think now we're also reaching the end of the time that we had blocked for this webinar. So thank you so much for your valuable insights and your perspectives on people risk. I enjoyed very much the discussion about people risks. And I would also like to encourage you and everybody in the audience to start facilitating this kind of discussion and to break down barriers that you have between the different functions, such as risk, HR, legal, and finance, talking about people risks, and to encourage these conversations. Thank you for our speakers today, and thank you so much for the audience that stayed with us until the very end. Have a great day and goodbye.